Wow.
Okay, so that says recording. So over to you, Sam, just when you're ready. I think we've still got a few minutes.
Yeah, it's I'll give it
a few seconds rather.
Few seconds, yes. We'll start on time, but let's begin. Some others people are still filtering through. So just as we start, and I will introduce myself. I'm Sam Hemsley. I'm an academic developer at the University of Sussex and colleague of Tab Betts, who is going to be taking us through the first of two workshops in this session. So this session runs from 11 to 12:30. And the second session at 11:45 is Wendy, Johnston, Sally Ann Starkey and Mike Mounfield, who will be speaking to you from a secret location, but let's see if you can guess what it is. But first we're going to hear from Tab. So Tab is a lecturer in higher education pedagogy at the University of Sussex and is also co-founder and institutional co-lead for the Active Learning Network. So he is speaking today on his manifesto for inclusive and accessible learning. So I am going to mute myself and I will hand over to Tab.
Thank you so much, Sam, for that lovely introduction. And also to the conference organisers for organising this wonderful conference, which perhaps for the first time ever in our history I've had almost nothing to do with, which is quite nice, just to see it blossoming on its own. And thank you everybody for coming along. So today we are going to, one small correction is that it's not my manifesto, it's our manifesto. So we're making a manifesto together about inclusive and accessible education. I think this is a really, really important thing for us to think about in terms of how we change practice across the sector. But it's also something that's very important for us all to do together, because otherwise it's not inclusive, it's not accessible if we're not doing it all together. So let me just share my screen quickly. It's also worth mentioning that we are actually launching a book today. It's not the manifesto, but we have a brand new book which has 109 authors, some of whom are here. So that's a very exciting bit of news, and maybe this inclusive manifesto will be another project, hopefully not of quite the same scope, but it could turn out to be something very influential like this book is going to be. So let me just put the link to this document in the chat first of all. So I'm going to put it in the chat and then I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can everybody see the Google Doc link that I've just shared in the chat? Yeah. Okay, and now on my screen, you should be able to see I'm sharing my screen. Just to note, if you've opened the document up, it should open up in your web browser, and you should be able to then type in the document. Just hold your horses for a moment. You should also see it shared on my screen right now. But just to note, Zoom will go full screen when I do that. But if you press Escape on your keyboard, you can actually go out of that full screen mode if you wanted to be editing the document yourself in your browser. So this is not a manifesto, but a manifesto for inclusive and accessible learning. We decided to change the name to make it more inclusive. And the basic idea is that as a community, we believe that learning needs to change and that society needs to change, and that we need to stop doing things which actively disable people and marginalize people and exclude people. And that's including our students, our learners, but also us, staff and people throughout our community. So at the top of this document, there's a list of people who attended a previous workshop where we started off this manifesto. This was at our global festival. And today we're going to be building on what we've already started. So one thing that you can do is you can come in and you can press enter at the end of that, and you can add your name if you would like to. Optionally, you can add pronouns, and you can also add your email, ideally with these marks either side of it, because it makes it easier to copy and paste it as a mailing list. So that would be great. If you're not already on there, please add. I can see Rachel's already having a go at that. So do press enter if you want to. You can press enter to create a new bullet point, yeah, so that you're not writing over each other. Okay. So that's the first thing. And the task today is what we're going to do is we're going to basically come up with a list of actions. So one of the things that came out of the previous workshop is we wanted to make this manifesto about actions, not just principles. You don't all need to do your names at once, but if you want to, let's just make lots of bullet points so that we're not writing over each other. Yeah, there we go. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to spend 5 minutes to think about a list of possible actions. So I want you to start doing that now. So you could take a piece of paper or you could write in a document on your computer. Think about a list of possible actions and make some notes for yourself in a document or on a piece of paper for actions that you think that the wider community should take to make learning more inclusive and accessible. Then in groups, we're going to choose one recommended action to develop as a group, and then we will write some ideas about it below here. So each group will have one action to look at. And then finally, we'll come back and we'll spend 5 or 10 minutes to share at the end. So that's the basic idea. So yeah, if it's a bit overwhelming with all the names there at the moment, just wait and you can add it later. Yeah, you don't have to add your name right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by just spending 5 minutes to think. Okay, so everybody, if you just spend a moment to think, you don't need to write it in the document, just think about it for yourself. What actions do we need to take as a community to make learning more inclusive? What could we do at our institutions? What policy changes do we need to make? What actions do we need to make in our teaching? Okay, so I'll just give you 5 minutes to think about that first of all. The next thing we're going to do is you're going to go into groups, and I would like just one person in the group to type in the document. Okay, so I don't want everyone typing at the same time. One person in the group types in the document at a time, and ideally that one person could share their screen and the other people can feed into the conversation either verbally by unmuting or typing in the chat. Okay, and you will have about 15 minutes or so to write down, to choose one action from the ones that you've just thought about. Choose one action and try to write some ideas down about that action. So let me just show you in the document. There will be 8 of these. Okay, so each group has one person from each group types here, and the questions that I've put in here are: what is the action? How can it be implemented, and what resources can help? If you want to change that slightly, that's fine, but that's just a guide to get you started. So we've got 6 actions here. I'm just going to make another couple. And if you could, 1 second, let's just stop that. If you could just put if you could just put the names of the people in your group underneath there, so that we don't have multiple people trying to write under the same action. Okay, so there's one action for each of the groups. If you put your names just underneath, one person from your group types in here, and after 15 minutes, ideally, we should have 8 actions that we can start off with as a way to frame our manifesto. Okay. Are there any questions about that before we go into breakout rooms? Oh, here we are. Everybody's coming back now. So welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you can see my screen share here. Thank you for all of those great ideas that are already in the document. If I could ask everyone, whoever was the scribe for their group, if they could just summarize the action beside the title there. And the way that I've done for action 6, you see, I've tried to sort of summarize the idea so that when we scan through the document, we can see what the key actions that we're suggesting are. And I think we only have 5 minutes before we have to kind of open the floor for questions. So I don't think we have time to go round to everybody and hear from each group, but we could just briefly have a look over the ideas here. So I'm just going to give people a moment to add their actions. I'll just talk about what our group did first. So we talked about recognizing and rewarding inclusivity with CPD events, career progression and awards, so that we build this community and as an institution, it's recognized and rewarded. So that was what we talked about in our group. I'm going to come back up now to see if, yeah, so accessibility of content, that's a very important point. Yeah, so things about like kind of universal design for learning type principles where there's at least one alternative for any content provided. Accessibility approaches to students, yeah. Even doing things like making people aware of the immersive reader that's available in most Microsoft tools. So being able to kind of have a Word document read aloud to you or be able to change the format so that you can see the text more clearly. Negotiated assessments. So that's a nice idea, giving the learners the opportunity to negotiate how they complete their assessment, that flexibility. And if anyone wants to add anything to explain their idea in the chat, then feel free to do that as well. How about action 4?
Okay, that was I was the scribe for this, and we had an interesting discussion about timetabling. And a couple of us we were talking about in-person teaching and the space constraints, and people were having to have unusual times of the day to teach just through space constraints, and also those of us teaching international students perhaps online, where the times that we're choosing to teach are not the times that somebody in the Far East would choose to have their lesson. And so we were thinking about a more collaborative approach to timetabling rather than this, you know, somebody in an office sits there and works out the timetable. And again, the main thing we were saying was that pedagogy should drive the timetable rather than institutional constraints.
That's a lovely point. Thank you very much. I think particularly when you've got people working in different national contexts, that's really important. So thank you for that, group 4. We've also got action 5, which is about accessible and inclusive workplace learning. So I think that probably links actually quite well with point 6, but that actually links to some of the keynote stuff, right? About resources, equipment, spaces, thinking about how we bring in diverse voices, co-creating the curriculum. Yeah, so there's a lot of great ideas. And there's a lovely case study here, which hopefully we'll be able to hear more about. And action 7 looks like it's about inclusivity and diversity in assessment. So that actually links to one of the earlier points, doesn't it, about negotiating assessments and thinking about designing it for your audience, for your learners, different modes of submission. So that, again, that's the sort of theme that we've seen. Again, that's a kind of universal design for learning type principle. So these are really good. It links to the content one as well. And establishing safe spaces. Yep, that's a great point as well. Yep, giving students opportunity to feedback anonymously. Yeah, really helpful ideas. And did anyone from group 2? Oh, okay, that's been added now. Great. Staff student interactions and relationships. So that's sort of something we talked about a bit as well. I think it's very important to create a kind of human, accessible and inclusive environment for learners and for staff, because it is doing things inclusively is actually hard work, and it takes time, and we need to support each other because we can't do it on our own. It's not something that any one person can do. It's not enough for just the teacher to be inclusive. Everyone needs to be inclusive. And so this is a really important point here. 5-minute individual meetings, that's a very good idea, but again, quite labor intensive. So thinking about how we take care of ourselves in that process too. I think that's a good suggestion though. Yeah, making yourself accessible to students. I actually regularly have arguments with my colleagues about this. And sometimes they think it's not helpful to make yourself accessible to students because then it creates an expectation for everybody. But I completely agree that I think it's important for us to do that, because it can be quite difficult as a learner to navigate all of the work in university contexts and other learning contexts. You need support, and you need one-to-one support. Peer support's a good way as well, though. And co-creating authentic assessments. So this is a theme, right, about co-creating the assessment, co-designing the learning. So that's really, really effective. Thank you so much for all of these actions. So I'm just aware that we're coming to time, but this is the first step, okay? And what I want this to be, this is the beginning of something that you'll be a part of to build going forward, if you would like to continue being part of it. And it will become a kind of working group where we build this this Hugh manifesto, this publication, but also we try to organize events and things to really embed this stuff in our institutions, embed this in our society. So thank you so much for being a part of that. And if you haven't already, you can add your name later. I can see some people still doing that. But thank you very much for being willing to try and make a better environment by contributing these ideas. Does anyone have any questions based on today's workshop or the Hugh manifesto?
I think there's a couple in the chat tab.
Great. Okay, so there's one from Ben. Okay, so how have you seen these kinds of documents used in practice to support change? It's a great question. I'm gonna actually open that up and ask, does anyone have something to share around that?
I would maybe just follow up on that. I think I guess these debates are just opening up the negotiations and thoughts about these important issues, and maybe by using case studies to illustrate in practice, what is good practice, like for example, Luban Restaurant that we're going to hear from very shortly, as a case study, then that is one way of seeing how people are implementing good practice in actual work placements, workplaces. So, but yeah, it's always the hardest thing in terms of measuring impact, isn't it?
Well, it is, but I think there are things that we can do. So one thing that comes to mind actually is the way that the HEA fellowships have had an impact on the emphasis on teaching in universities, right? So, I mean, there are many people here I know who either have fellowship with the HEA in some way or support other people to get that, and that is based on a set of standards, professional standards framework that has been adopted by institutions. And I think if we had something that was around inclusivity, that which had a set of actions and a set of principles that institutions could bring on, and it was rewarded and recognised, and we could really see those changes taking place the same way that the HA fellowships have had an impact. Rod, you've got a hand up.
I'm afraid I have to butt in at this point as chair,
No
because we are out of time. Just very quickly to pick up on your last point, Tab, I will share it in the chat, but the draft UK PSF has 3 core principles, which is new to the revised UK PSF, and one of which is inclusivity. So I think there's a really brilliant steer there from Advanced HE as well. So thank you so much, Tab, for a brilliant session, and also for creating the start of a HU manifesto, which is a term I will be using in the future. But now it is my job to pass you on to our next session, which is Wendy Johnston and Sally-Ann Starkey from Liverpool John Moores University, and Mike Mounfield, who's the operational director of the Luban restaurant and Luban Foundation. And their session is called An Appetite for Change, Authentic Learning Experiences Beyond the Classroom. Now, I understand they're going to start with a slide, but I do recommend that once that slide is passed, that you, in your view, you go to speaker view, because you will, to get the most immersive experience from what promises to be quite an exciting session today. So I'm going to hand over now to the team.
Okay, we can hear you now. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, we're just trying to share screen.
Right, okay, so good morning, it's still morning. I'm Wendy Johnston, I'm a senior lecturer at Liverpool John Moores University, and I'm here with my co-presenters who are...
Mike Mounfield.
Hi, I'm Starkey from LJMU.
Okay, and what we're going to do now is we're going to stop sharing our PowerPoint. The only slides that you'll see from us today will be probably a maximum of 3 slides, because what we want you to do is to be able to see the environment that we're in. As you can probably see, it's a very non-traditional classroom space. We're not stood in what would be considered a traditional classroom. Hopefully you can see the background behind us. If we just stand out of the way, hopefully you can see what's going on, and we'll explain to you as we go through where we are and why we're here. But to begin with, I just wanted to give you an overview of why we're doing what we're doing. We believe it's really important to look at authentic learning spaces and to look at learning experiences beyond the traditional classroom. I, along with Sally, teach on the BSc Nutrition Programme and the BSc Sport Nutrition Programme. So what we're doing is being based on those programmes. A traditional classroom for us is sort of a traditional space, usually with traditional seating areas. Students generally face one way. It's very very teacher centred. Quite often 4 walls, a whiteboard in there, sort of closed door is quite often used to describe our teaching methods. It's very much closed door and not particularly shared. We find our students will go and sit in the same place. So if they're with you for a semester or a year for a module, they'll quite often sit in the same space. So they're quite often creatures of habit. And we as tutors quite often stand at the front and relay that information. Not all of us, but some of our practices just stand and relay the information. Quite often the methods are passive rather than active. Students are quite often very quiet. They will interact with us when asked, but quite often very quiet throughout sessions, unless you're involved in some group work or some active learning. Many students will attend sessions and then leave. So you don't get any of the sort of the social interaction between students or between students and tutors. So it's attend the session and then off they go. So for me, and this is in reference to Chickering and Gamson, 1987, for me, I don't believe that students actually learn sort of very much just by sitting in a classroom. And for me, I would far rather than have them out of the classroom environment so that their learning can be enhanced. So we decided to look at things very differently. Hence the title of our presentation, which is An Appetite for Change, Authentic Learning Experiences Beyond the Traditional Classroom. We're not in a traditional classroom environment in any shape or form. It's very, very non-traditional. And I'm going to hand over to Mike, who's just going to set the scene about where we are. So somebody in the previous session asked us where we were, and I said I wasn't telling you until we actually did our session. So Mike is now going to share where we are.
Okay, hello everybody. My name's Mike Mounfield, and as I said earlier, I'm the Ops Director for the Luban restaurant, and we're actually in Liverpool. We're in Kane's Brewery in Liverpool. And before I tell you about the story of the Luban restaurant and what it stands for and why it's here, just a little bit about myself. I worked in FE for 20 odd years. I was involved in the approval of quite a few foundation degrees, particularly around hospitality and management. And I left FE as an assistant principal. I got disillusioned by it because we weren't involved with students enough, or I wasn't involved with students enough, and set up my own company doing hospitality education consultancy. And that role, working for myself, got me involved in what is known as the Luban Workshop. So going back to 2018, I met two people, Dr. Jiaoli Dutton, who is Chinese, a lady, and a gentleman called Russell Grocott. And they had an education consultancy business, mainly focusing on management skills. But working with Jiaoli and Jiaoli's family in China, a region of China called Tianjin, Jiaoli was being encouraged to find a partner to be part of the Luban Workshop. Now, the Luban Workshop is a government initiative, and in essence, the Luban Workshop is the way the Chinese Department of Education encourage vocational education. So there's 12 Luban workshops around the world offering different disciplines, from robotics to logistics to rail to medicine. And we secured through our bid the ability to teach Chinese cookery and Chinese culture globally under the umbrella of Luban Workshop. So we're studying Luban Restaurant in Liverpool, but this core business is education, hence why we work closely with Liverpool John Moores University, schools and colleges across England, and one or two in Wales. So I got involved because of the Dr. Jiaoli and Russell had created a level 3 qualification for those wishing to learn about Chinese food and Chinese culture. The qualification was to follow UK standards and be approved by UK standards, which it is. Sadly, it's not funded, but it's an approved qualification. All the learning materials to support the qualification were written by chefs that work in the Second School of Commerce in Tianjin, which is a premier cookery school. Those of you who may know China, on the east coast of China, Tianjin, quite a big district. So that cookery school is based within there. The chefs that work at that cookery school are all master chefs who assess master chefs. So you've got the creme de la creme, to coin a phrase. And I worked with those chefs because they'd written the learning material. The learning material was translated into English, and it's fair to say a lot of it didn't make sense. So words like rump didn't translate, and certain culinary techniques that were 3 pages, I could replace with a single word, because the chef should have known at that level, the student chef should know at that level what that preparation technique is. I spent the summer of 2018 working through pages and pages of documents of Pidgin English, and converted it into what I think is a good piece of work so students can learn Chinese cookery. As part of that learning and the qualification, we were also asked to produce a level 2 and a level 4 qualification to be approved or accredited in the UK, in England. And that also exists, level 2 Chinese cookery, which is specializing in the food of the region of Tianjin, and level 4, which in essence is a hospitality management qualification, but makes reference to Chinese culture and Chinese dining. Once we've completed those tasks, it's fair to say, out of the blue, I received a phone call from Russell, and Russell said, we're at the next stage of the project. Now, I didn't know the project was going to be divided into stages. And the next stage was China, through the Tianjin Food Group and the college, wanted us as an organisation to open a training centre somewhere in England to offer Chinese cookery. Straight away, Liverpool was the obvious answer. We had connections with council, we had connections with the hospitality industry, and we knew we could make it happen in Liverpool. We knew we had the people around us to make it happen in Liverpool. So in the January of 2019, I found myself in a boardroom of the Tianjin Food Group, sharing a design of a restaurant that was also a learning environment. So Wendy did say that this is a non-traditional learning environment, but the brief we had was to create an education environment. So the restaurant is designed in such a way that we can host conferences and we can host lecture-style presentations, the way that the restaurant's designed. There are TVs on the wall, which guests think we just show pictures of our great food, but actually they're positioned so we can present effectively to an audience of 60 to 80 people. The kitchen, as you can see, it's a big kitchen for the size of the restaurant, but that's intentional. What you can't see where Sally sat is a chef's table which sits 6 people, and that's also used for students who want to come in and watch what's going on in the kitchen. We've had students studying international food spend the day with us, and they just sit at the chef's table. And they've got access to the chef so they can quiz them on the food and the techniques and the menu. We have a private dining room that seats 12 people on an amazing round table. And again, there's a TV in there and we present in there. We have a wine room which seats 14, which is accredited with the Wine and Spirit Education Trust for wine studies and wine exams. And we have what we call the food lab. The food lab is a space for 12 guests to dine, but it's also where we do our dish development and we bring students in to learn about food and taste food within that setting. So that's Luban Restaurant and what we do. So when a guest walks through the door, they see an amazing restaurant. And I need to say at this point, we are Visit England's Restaurant of the Year, which was a shock, I must say. But other guests that walk through the door who are studying, whether they are students from the university or school pupils or teachers that come through the doors, we are a learning environment. I say teachers because we were all pleased as chefs that GCSE catering was back on the curriculum. We were quick to organise a conference for teachers to go through each of the units within that qualification so we could share with them how we can support their learning and their learning development. So that's what we do and how we do it. So the relationship with John Moores University came about. Wendy and I have known each other for several years. I was involved in the opening of what's known as the L20 Hotel School within a college in Liverpool. Wendy and I met. I went off and did different things, and then our paths crossed again. And Wendy came to me and said, "Can we do something together for the students that are on Wendy's courses?" The answer was yes. That's what we do. That's what we're about. That's what we want to do. And between us, we came up with this concept of what Wendy christened it the carousel of learning. What we do is we take 60 students. We can take a few more, but 60 is the optimum or the best number from the sessions we've done and sessions we've done with schools and colleges. And we bring the students in. We welcome in the bar. We have a big bar, not that it's open, and we give them tea, coffee, orange juice, water, and some breakfast, whether that's fruit or a bacon sandwich. Because what we realised with some of the schools in particular, that the pupils may have not been fed in the morning, so their energy levels and their enthusiasm is quite low. So we do feed them. And then we divide the groups into 4. So a typical example would be they could go into the lab, and I mentioned earlier about protein replacements. So we'll, in the middle of the lab table will be all the bugs, all the grubs, all the proteins. And then we'll have a discussion for around 40 minutes about sustainability, source of proteins, energy value associated with the proteins, and are they a fair replacement for traditional proteins, whether that's for a meat eater or a veggie or a vegan. In another room where the round table is, we will put 12 ingredients on the table, and they could be something as simple as chocolate, or it may be an ingredient that they've never come across. It could be a Chinese vinegar or a multitude of things. And what we do is we put the 12 ingredients on the round table. There's a chef in the room with them, as there is in every session. We spin the table, because we've got a massive lazy Susie in the middle of the round table. And where the ingredient stops in front of the chef, for the next 5 minutes, that chef will share what that ingredient is. They may taste it, understand where it's come from, its origins, why it's used, its cost, it's the sustainability factors associated with that ingredient, the dishes it can be used in. And also, if there's a dish where it's a meat-based product, what alternative ingredients can be used to make that dish vegetarian or vegan or a gluten replacement, and so on and so forth. In the wine room, we do a theory-based activity. So that could be around menu planning, or it could be around nutrition. And then in the kitchen, we bring the students in, and we'll get them to watch a cookery demonstration, and we'll get them to get involved. And in the previous session, we were talking about inclusivity and accessibility for learning. So we take into consideration the ability of the students who are stood watching the demonstration, and in every session. So if someone's worked in the sector, has got a little bit of experience working in a kitchen or a restaurant or a hotel, we'll encourage them to share their experience and their knowledge. And we also encourage them to give examples of what they've done that is similar, or where their learning can fit with their qualification and their workplace. We've got what we call the Luban Foundation, and that's where our education sits, our education office sits. So if you want to find out, you can get out luban.org. You'll see the website. And from my own experience of organising trips and visits for students and the perils of paperwork, on that website you will find risk assessments, you'll find the copies of the insurance documents, the COVID risk assessment. So we've tried to make organising coming here as simple as possible. There is a range of courses that we offer as days out courses. So there's no massive paperwork involved for the student. It is about engaging, learning, and having a good time, hopefully. We also offer corporate training days. We're doing another event which is not linked to Wendy's department, but it's for Liverpool John Moore's staff, where we've got a group of staff coming along just for an end-of-year corporate activity where they'll be making cocktails, learning how to use chopsticks, and cooking their own lunch. And then we've got a group of girls coming from Manchester High School who want to learn about the role of the restaurant manager, the chef, and the legislation associated with running such a business. So I think I've covered a big chunk of what we do. I'm more than happy to take questions as appropriate. But I'm going to hand over to Wendy.
Thank you. Hopefully you can see our background, because when I'm looking on our screen, I can just see one of our participants. So I'm hoping you can see what's going on behind us. It's a shame that we haven't got smelly vision, because it smells absolutely lovely in here at the moment. I don't know what they're preparing with. It's gorgeous.
I'll tell you what you can smell. You can smell what we call master stock. So that master stock is a base of a lot of the dishes we do. So whereas for an Indian restaurant, for example, may have a base curry which would be onion and tomato base, we use master stock. So you can smell what you call toban yang, which is fermented red beans.
That's beautiful. shame we can't share that with you, but we can just tell you it does smell gorgeous. So anyway, building on the work that we've done with Mike, our students have actually linked theory with practice, and we found it had a huge amount of benefits. And I'll discuss the benefits with you in a few minutes, because I just want to link to another partnership which we built on from Louvain. Mike has lots and lots of contacts. One of his contacts is with Kendal College. So we decided that we would take our partnership further and allow our students to go to Kendal. Now, I know I said our title is non-traditional classrooms. When we took the students to Kendal College, Kendal is a traditional setting for Kendal students because those students are on catering programmes. For our students, it was a non-traditional classroom because currently we don't have kitchens within LJMU where our students can learn. So we took them to Kendal College. And we chose Kendal College very deliberately, mainly because we have the contact with Mike and the two linked, but also Kendal College has an unrivaled reputation for delivering some of the most talented chefs, managers and industry professionals in the UK. It has first-class commercial educational kitchens, which our students had full reign. So they were able to go into the pastry kitchens, they were able to go into the main kitchens, as they do when they come here. And to Louvain, they worked with industry professionals and with chefs, and they really got hands-on and they had a fabulous time. One of the things we noticed the most about taking students both to Louvain and to Kendal College was the increase in the social interaction. Mike alluded to it before. When the students came in, they were very quiet. When they left, they were chatting away really nicely. Sally and I can confirm that when we took them on the coach and to Kendal, we had students from level 4 to level 7 on the coach, and they were very, very quiet on the way there, really quiet, worryingly quiet on the way there. We mixed them up when we got there, so they were put into separate groups. They cooked together, we ate together. So what the students made, and they made a 3-course meal as part of their day. They learned to plate it professionally, and then they served it as lunch, and we all sat down together and ate, which was a lovely social experience. And that working together and eating together brought those students together, and the volume on the coach going back was markedly different. It was absolutely wonderful to see. So one of the big things that's come tumbling out of using spaces, which we class as non-traditional, is that social element. Again, you know, we set similar tasks at Kendal for the students to do, but they were very, very much hands-on, and we've got some images to show you at the end of the presentation, just to give you an idea of what those students did. So whilst the students were at Kendal, they learnt new skills, as they did when they were working here at Louvain, food skills, social skills, interaction skills, a whole range of different skills that we wouldn't necessarily be able to give them in a classroom environment. It's a very, very different learning experience for them. When they were at Kendal, they had to calculate the nutritional value of the meals that they prepared, and then they had to recalculate it to suit an athlete. So they were given set scenarios, and they had to work to those scenarios. So there was an educational theme underlying everything that we've done here at Louvain and when we were at Kendal College. And for us, that link with theory and practice is vital to make sure that all of that runs really, really well. It's very different for our students, Mike. You alluded before to the fact that, you know, most young people have been shut away as part of COVID lockdown. And I'm sure, you know, most of you will have seen a marked difference in your students. They don't interact very well. We find they don't make eye contact very well. They're unwilling to ask questions. They're quite unwilling to answer questions. And we found that this way of teaching them, taking them out of what they might consider to be their comfort zone and putting them into something which is very, very different, where they've got this socialisation along with skills and theory, has really, really worked for us. I hope you can see in the background, we've got a couple of the chefs working here. Mike, do you want to say anything about what they're doing?
Yeah, so the guy you can see with the knife, that's Niall.
Niall, give us a wave.
One of our senior chefs, and in the background around the corner is Tony. It's Tony. And then there's a young lady called Kaylee who's working at the bottom of the kitchen. I think she's just in the store at the moment. She's doing pastry. What's interesting about the kitchen, you can see the wok range, which is just behind Wendy. We actually went to China. I went to China shopping for a weekend, and we purchased wok ranges, fridges, chopsticks, steamer baskets, crockery, and shipped it all back. I mentioned earlier we work with a region called Tianjin, which is on the east coast of China, and we've created our own gin for the restaurant. We actually called it Tianjin, which the Chinese loved. Not that they drink gin. And we also work very closely with a champagne house in France called Drapier to get our own champagne. This is for Wendy and Sally and I after we've completed it.
Sorry, we can't share that either. I think another really important thing to add to what we've been discussing so far is it's not only the experiences that students have benefited from, the physical experiences of being here. Mike has very kindly involved our students in so many other things. So they've produced the most wonderful food cookery book, which is called Cherry Blossom.
Right.
And the photography for that, Mike allowed our students to come in and watch that. So to see how images were done professionally, see what actually goes into it. So there's been so many different buy-ins. Mike took 2 of our students for work-related learning placements, and those students had the most phenomenal time. One of those students has actually gone on to get the highest prize for his work-related learning portfolio. They really, really enjoyed this working in what we would consider non-traditional environments. And some of the benefits, I guess, for us is we've created personalised learning environments for students. They're multifaceted and they include both independent and group work, which is vitally important for students. The groups that we've put them in, so Mike talked about putting them into rooms where they did their carousel. At Kendall, we did the same thing. So they were student-centred and small working groups, which worked really well. The students were actively engaged. We actually, Sally and I actually challenged our own long-held teaching traditions. You know, we had to step outside of our comfort zones as well, because to do this kind of teaching and learning involves the staff working as a team as well. So we have to know the benefits of this. We have to know what the buy-in is. We have to know what we want our students to do. So we were challenging what we considered long-held teaching traditions. We're helping prepare students for the world of work. And I guess most importantly, we're giving our students control over what they're learning. So although they could choose the order in which they went into different rooms and the order in which they did different things at Kendall, they were ultimately choosing what they wanted to do first, second, third and fourth. So we were giving them that choice. It harnessed creativity. So we watched students who were quite uncomfortable being picked up and taken out of their comfort zone, suddenly finding their feet and deciding that, you know what, this way of learning is actually fun. They were gaining lots of skills. We watched them chatting to the chefs. Mike showed the woks behind us here, and Tony, who's trying to frantically walk away from me, but Tony, who's there, did a session with students in here where they were all gathered around the wok. So there was, what I'm trying to say really is there's no areas that are off limit. You know, when we come here, there's no areas that are off limit for our students. It's a fantastic social activity as well as an amazing learning activity. And for us as staff, we've learned so much as well about how our students learn and what we can do to make that a better experience. Oh, and the top's just blown off the champagne. That wasn't planned. So we're less teacher directed in the activities that we're doing and more content driven, but more innovative content. And we're actually managing what we would call hubs of learning. So instead of having one classroom activity going on with one teacher at the front, which is what I was saying at the beginning, in this usually very corporate space with 4 walls and a whiteboard and a teacher, we've got lots of different activities going on at any one time, with us as staff moving between those activities, Mike and his team managing those activities, and our students really enjoying it. They were fed, and that went down really well. Students absolutely loved the food that they got here. And we believe that they had deep learning as they went through. So I don't want you to take our word for it. We'd like to actually show you a very short video and some images, just to give you an idea of why we think it worked. So if you just bear with us a minute. Anybody that knows me knows I'm not techie in any shape or form. Could you just show those?
Yeah, just need to share screen.
I'm not clicking or touching anything, and hopefully nothing will break. So if we, can we just show the images first? So these are some images that we took at Kendal College. So the first image shows we've got level 4, level 5 and level 6 students in that shot. And they were making the most wonderful fish dish, which was our starter for the day. Those students hadn't worked before ever as a group, and they actually love that experience. The second image is showing the main kitchen, again with students working with one of Kendal's tutors in there.
Yeah, the chef that's on that particular picture is a guy called Yannick. He was the personal chef for the French ambassador before he joined Kendal College.
And then this shows again on the main kitchens at Kendal. This was a kitchen I particularly wanted. In fact, no, there's 2 different kitchens here. There's a main kitchen on the right of my screen and the pastry kitchen on the left. The pastry kitchen was my favourite place to be. They were making the most wonderful chocolate dessert there. And that is one of our final year students who wasn't used to working in a social environment, wasn't used to working with people, and he actually loved the day. I came back and promoted it to other students. And then Sally, that second image, what were you making there?
Oh, we were making pastas. We were making pasta and chicken sauces.
Oh yeah, so pasta and chicken sauce there. So everything that you can see the students making there, they were taught to plate it up professionally. And then we sat down in the dining room and we ate socially. And I think that's a really important point from all of this. You don't get that in a traditional classroom space. You don't get that sharing of ideas, of skills, of creativity, and ultimately of food. So that worked really well. And what we'd like to show you next is a video that we produced when we were at Luban for the day, which just shows you the carousel of learning. It also introduces Dave Critchley.
Yeah.
Who, do you want to explain who Dave is?
Yeah, so Dave's our executive head chef. He joined us right at the start of the project. We weren't open, along with Tony and Kaylee, who you can see in the shot as well. They're part of our original team. Dave was sent to China to do some research, as I did. Dave and I do all the recipes and all the menus. But Dave through the project has sort of become famous. He's done 2 series of Great British Menu. Dave and Dimitri last week before we're on, come down with me, the professionals. So Dave's got a really big presence. You will see him on the video, and he may even pop in the next hour or so. So I'm going to start the video. Just bear with me. I'm going to start it and then enlarge it.
So Luban is an amazing partnership between Liverpool and also one of the catering colleges out in China. A real interesting project where we showcase Chinese culinary arts in their true form from Tianjin in the UK.
We've brought students today to give them an experience which is slightly different to they'd get in university, to get them to socialise a little bit more with each other as a first year group, but also to upskill them. So they're on either a nutrition course or a sport nutrition course. So we need them to have some food skills, some hands-on skills, to work with foods they've not worked with before, to work with qualified chefs, and to gain some knowledge and some experience. And most importantly, to have some fun.
These students are all doing nutrition, so it's really interesting for them to come in to a working environment like this, see a professional kitchen, speak to my chefs and my team who've been doing this for a long time, many years experience between us. So it's really been good to get their point of view and what their aspirations are for the future.
I've learned a lot more of like Chinese cuisine and the different aspects of the food involved with it, and then that's furthered our knowledge into what we're doing as part of our course and how it's all interlinked. And overall, I think it's been a really good experience. I'll definitely come to this class once again. It allows them to look at different opportunities. So they've done a lot on sustainability during the morning, which is a massive issue, really current issue at the moment.
Well, I did a 45-minute session on food security and sustainability. So we looked at some reasons of why that's happening across the planet, and then we looked at some ways that the food manufacturing industry and the catering industry are developing to kind of ensure food security and looking at non-meat-based products. So we looked at a variety of different products which provide.
My favourite part of today is chatting with the chefs and learning about what they do in the kitchen in the restaurant and being part of their daily life. I think it's really supportive, and I think it's a good way of educating this really nice project that they've got going here. For us to have collaborative partnerships is really important. It enriches the programme, it enriches the student experience, it allows socialisation. There's a lot of real benefits from it, and it's been a great day, you know, both the students and the staff.
It's really important that we collaborate and collectively we can help train and pass that knowledge around as much as we can between universities, schools, other restaurants as well. And yeah, I really see that being a big circle of knowledge where we're taking information from these places like LJMU and using that information ourselves within our industry and vice versa. And hopefully what we'll get is more knowledge, more education, and more people interested in nutrition.
So hopefully that gave you an idea of what the day entailed. It also showed you the different rooms that Mike was talking about. So when we were talking about the wine room and the where the big round table is, the room with the skeleton in. I don't know whether you noticed the skeleton on the video.
It's the lab. Every lab has a skeleton.
Every lab has to have a skeleton, and they serve foods in there in test tubes, which is pretty remarkable. And I hope you picked up from that video that the students did look genuinely happy. We didn't tell them to look genuinely happy, they just were as the day went on. And also they actually ate their way through the entire day. There was absolutely loads of foods going on. So we hope that's given you an idea of the work that we've been doing with Mike here at Luban and with Kendall College. We hope we've explained in some way the benefits for us particularly of using a non-traditional classroom space. We'd love to hear your thoughts. I think Sally's typed some questions into the chat. And you know, if anybody wants to verbally ask us questions, we're more than happy to answer them. I'm sure Mike can tell you a little bit more about here if you need to know. But thank you for your time. We appreciate it's a busy conference, so thank you for your time. And we can have a little look at the chat. So what have we got? So we've got academics can be reluctant to repurpose their material. I absolutely agree with that. And I think it's a case of us having to step outside of our comfort zone as well. You know, we expect our students to do that. So maybe we need to do that as well. And we've done it as a teaching team. You know, we made the decision as to what we were going to do. And we don't always get buy-in from staff, but the staff that do buy into it are the ones that run events such as this. What else have we got?
Can I just add on with that while Wendy's looking at the questions just a little bit? You have a look at the questions. Is that, you know, to see the students on these days, because obviously I've gone along as a member of staff like Wendy on the days, and it's unbelievable, you know, sort of for us, not even from an academic, it's a bit like learning by stealth, I always tend to think. But the nice thing for us, I think, staff, or one of the main takeaways I have from this is most definitely about getting to know the students, understanding the students, why they're here, why they're doing the things that they do. And I think one of the big things for us that we've really noticed, as Wendy mentioned earlier, about especially post-COVID, is how they interact with each other and how they're interacting with others as staff. And I think one of the big things that these type of activities have done for me as a staff member is that we definitely get to see the students, we get to know them better, and as a result of that we can then also help them academically later on. So they are learning by doing, but I don't think they realise how much they're learning and how much we can then link these activities to future modules and other content and other modules. That's been invaluable for me this year as a teaching member, you know, that whilst I've not necessarily been teaching food relating courses, I can talk to them about when we went to Luban or when we went to Kendal. So the links across to other modules and other ways of working are brilliant, but I think one of the big things is about building that relationship with the students, which post-COVID has been a real big undertaking, and we've really needed to do it, I think, to sort of really get them to engage in further learning on their programme, and this has so helped with that. It's been brilliant.
It has indeed. And going back to what Sally said about modules, we've linked this to so many of our modules from level 4 right through to level 7. So it's cross food sustainability, it's cross work-related learning, it's cross professional practice, and so we've linked it really well. Somebody put a note in the comment to say it helped with the students with quieter voices, and it absolutely does. I alluded to having students here on placement with Mike. We had 2 very different students, one very quiet student and one very outgoing student, and both of those students flew while they were on placement here. Somebody else has put in that food is a very socially bonding experience, and it absolutely is. Food crosses every boundary, and we found that, you know, students have literally eaten their way through the days, both at Kendal and at Luban. It's been a fantastic experience. Mike, can you just say something else?
That's it, we're up on the page.
Can I just build a little
Yeah.
bit, just quickly on what Wendy was saying, the students that came to mind. What also we saw with those students is that whilst one was very outgoing and one was very quiet, there was also one that was very academic, and there was one that wasn't necessarily as strong academically, and actually they worked very well together to enhance all the, you know, so one became more outgoing, one possibly became a bit more academic, and vice versa. So that combination of students in this setting who possibly would never have worked together to the same extent and to the same degree in their modules, actually this environment did bring them together, so that they learned the things they learned were unbelievable just by being here.
I think what's also to point out that what we offer here is not just for students studying food or nutrition or hospitality. We're confident that we can link any area of learning to food and activities linked to food, whether that's history, geography, the sciences, the arts. We could create a day out for students on any programme. We're confident we could do that. We might struggle if someone comes with brain surgery, but I'm sure we could 9 times out of 10 we could put a package together, and working collaboratively, working with yourselves, because you obviously know the curriculum and you understand what you need. We can convert that concept into learning here. We did a session a few years back for people who didn't teach maths, who were encouraged to teach numeracy as part of their lessons, and we did a half-an-hour session on gin and tonic.
Yeah.
And it was ratios, it was weights, it was measures, it was fractions with the lemon, the ice, and everything else. So we're confident we can satisfy most curriculum areas.
I don't know whether you can see in the background there, but service is hotting up here. It's smelling absolutely beautiful. Tony, what are you making? Poaching a lobster. I don't know how far down you can see there. Well, it's such a hard job this, you know. I've got champagne to my right and a lobster behind me. It's absolutely fantastic. Sam, I'm sure we're virtually running out of time. If anybody would like to ask us any more questions, please do so, and we'll pick it up in the chat as well. And Tab, I think you've shared the link to Luban somewhere in the chat, so thank you for that. I can heartily recommend eating here. The food is amazing. And thank you very much for your time. Sam, is there anything else that I need to do?
No, but give yourselves a hearty, big old pat on the back, and maybe reopen that bottle of champagne. I think that's well earned. That's a brilliant session. Thank you so much. It's been really interesting. And looking at the chat, there's lots and lots of conversation on there, as I'm sure you can see, around how these spaces can be used, particularly for interdisciplinary teaching and learning, and really bringing staff and students together in these collaborative spaces to explore ideas from different perspectives. So I'm sure that will be followed up on in lots of different ways. And you've made everybody very, very hungry. So, I am, yeah.
Any way we
So
can capture that chat?
say that again, sorry.
Is there any way we can capture the chat?
Vicky, I believe we can we?
Yes.
I can try.
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, anyone can save the chat by just going to chat and then the 3 dots and then save chat.
And then what tab?
But
Right, Sally can do it.
I was going to say anyone can save the chat from the chat, but we can probably save it and send it afterwards,
Fabulous.
can't we?
There's a question there about hosting conferences. We do host conferences. Happy to have a further conversation about being the host.
Yeah.
Is that for an ALN conference?
That was me just saying, yeah. I mean, wouldn't it be great if our next conference we could do it Luban, and then we can actually taste some of these amazing things that we've been hearing about.
The idea of eating our way through the day.
You and I and Mike, is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Involved, and we can discuss that.
Be brilliant.
Fabulous.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Right, I'm just going to let you come back out to the kitchen before we go.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody for joining this session, this workshop and the one before. We're now entering into another break. Thank you again to the organisers and to the presenters. It's now the lunch break, 12:30, and we reconvene at 1:30. So thank you once again. We've saved that chat and we will share it with the presenters and anybody.
Thanks, Sam.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.